Hello, this is Mark Anders again, coming back to you with a third video where I'm going to speak to you about the experience I had with depression. The last video I spoke about what it was like on my very first episode, but I failed to mention that there were certain symptoms there that also accompanied that time, such as fatigue and a loss of interest. It led eventually to my getting started with alcohol and partying, and so there were some things about that I didn't mention before about that first episode I had. And incidentally, I have found out since then that the thing of depression, depending on what type it is, if it's chronic, it can last up to a couple of years. Some episodes of depression only last 2 or 3 months. But eventually, it will go away on its own. But that doesn't mean it will stay away forever. But you can have a time when you will be free from it. At least that has been my experience. And so, coming to the next thing here, when I got out of the military service in 1982, I was depression-free and having fun. I had a good job. I was out, unfortunately, got involved in drugs and alcohol and partying harder than ever after I had gotten out there, and just trying to have a good time. But in October of 1984, after one night clubbing it, I was hit with some kind of a upper respiratory illness. It was something I went to the doctor and got some medication for it. I think it was like a Z-Pack, and a couple days I started feeling better. But then after that started feeling better, then in a couple days after that, it felt like it was coming back again. But it was different this time. Suddenly I didn't feel like myself. I started feeling tired all the time. Even when I wake up in the morning, I was still feeling tired. I just didn't feel like myself. I didn't feel like things were in sync. I felt out of touch with myself, and couldn't figure out what was going on, what was causing all this fatigue. And so I went back to the doctor again about it, and he just gave me more of the same medication. But the medication he gave me didn't help me that time. And so I started going to see a doctor, another medical doctor about it, and in a course of time, 3 different medical doctors. And every one of them tried to help me, but to no avail. It was not helping me snap out of this. And the final doctor I went to see, he ran all kinds of tests on me. And he sat down with me and told me about all the systems of the body and how he had gone over them and they had tested for him, and that medically there was nothing wrong with me. But I knew that there was. He told me there was nothing medically wrong with me, and he suggested that maybe I try to see about seeing a psychologist, someone that could counsel with me. Well, as I was thinking that over and all, and time was rolling around, Christmas came around, and then January came around, I can remember it. I can remember the day. It was January the 15th in 1985. I was sitting in my home one night, and it was like all of a sudden the bottom dropped out in my mind. All of these old thoughts and the anxiety and the worrisome thoughts and the guilt and all that came pouring back into my head. And I thought, oh no, how terrible. I was miserable. And in the days following, frankly, I don't even really know how I kept on working like I did. And so then I knew I was going to have to try to talk with someone, and so I went to see a psychologist there in town. And it started the same process that I had had before when I was at 17. I started telling this doctor, this psychologist, all these things that were going through my head, the things that were bothering me, the guilt and the worry and all of that. And he was telling me the same thing those other psychologists told me back when I was 17, that there was nothing for me to worry about, that I was wasting my time worrying about these things. Well, I knew that was true, but it just wasn't registering with me or something. I couldn't get myself to accept it somehow. And it really was wearing on me. And it came to a point to where I was just beginning to lose hope. I was beginning to just worry about it, thinking, what's going to happen to me? I remember one night I came by to visit with my parents, and I just sat down and talked with them before I went out to my apartment. But as I talked with them, they could tell something was really wrong, but I went ahead and left and started going to my apartment. And on the way out there, it was so pressing on me. I just started screaming out, "What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me?" I was worried. I was crying. I was tore up. I was a mess. And I'm thankful that night that when I got home into my apartment, my mother called me and asked me if I didn't just want to come back over there and stay the night. And I said, yes, I would like to. And I really didn't know what I was going to do with this. I tried this, going to see a medical doctor, a psychologist. Nothing is changing. Nothing is helping me. And I guess I had always subconsciously had a path in my mind I was going to follow to get help for this. The medical part of it, hoping a doctor could help me. Then the psychological part of it, somebody, a counselor or something, could help me in some way. But then I thought, as a last resort, I would turn to God. It's sad that I had to say it that way, but that's the way it was. It was a last resort. I believed in God. I believed that God had the power to do anything. He was almighty. But I wasn't in any way walking with God or going to church in my lifestyle. But I started going to church because I was going to find out. And if God couldn't help me, then nobody was going to be able to help me. But I went to church. It was my last resort. I was going to seek out God. I didn't know how I was going to do it exactly, but I was going to go to church and try to find God there. I remember one Sunday we were singing this hymn. The title of the hymn was "Glorious is Thy Name." It's the McKinney version for those of you who might be interested in looking that hymn up. The McKinney version. We were singing that hymn, and I was just standing there really not singing that much because I was really kind of feeling, reserved there and a little bit shy to even be there and felt kind of bad. But all of a sudden during that hymn, I started feeling this tingling come over my whole body. It seemed to come to me in waves. And it caused tears to well up in my eyes and start flowing down. And my dad saw it, and I looked up at him as if to say, I don't even know what's going on here. I don't know what's happening. But it was very real. I didn't really know what it meant after I left the service that day, and I decided in a couple of weeks there to try to go to the Sunday school class and meet some people there. And when I went the first time, I saw an old friend that we used to play Little League Baseball together, and he was sitting there, and in my way of thinking at the time, I looked at him as somebody that must have got religion because he had a glow on his face, and I knew something had happened, and I knew he took his religion seriously. He came up to me after the class and gave me his phone number. He didn't push himself on me. He just said, if you ever need to talk to someone, let me know. Here's my number. He had no idea how desperate I was. And so that afternoon, I called him up. I said, man, I would really like to talk with you. I've got some things on my mind. I'm going through a hellacious time right now. And he said, well, let's meet tomorrow night maybe if that's convenient for you. And I said, yeah. So the next night he came over. We met at my parents' house, and we drove out to my new apartment I had just gotten. And after we got there, we sat down and we started talking about what was going on with me and why I was so distraught and hurting. And he began to ask me, he said, Mark, have you ever been saved and baptized? I said, yes. Actually, I had been baptized twice, once when I was 12, another time when I was 17 years old. He said that, are you sure that you've been saved? Because the way you come across right now, you're not sure of much anything. And you know, I've been always glad that he asked me that question. And I told him, I said, no, I'm not sure. I didn't know where I stood. And he said, well, do you want to make sure? Greatest question of the night. And I said, yes, I would. So he led me through a prayer to accept Christ, to begin to trust him, to turn my life over to God, knowing that God would save me and give me eternal life. Well, I got to tell you, I didn't really think that much about that after we left that night. I went back over to my parents' house. We were going to watch the ball game together. And I didn't think much about it. But when I got up the next day, I noticed that I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years in my heart. I mean, it just felt like air here. I thought, man, alive. So I called up Steve, the one that we talked that night before, and I said, Steve, what did we do last night? I told him, man, I have a peace here. You wouldn't believe how much pressure I was under, had been under for months. But I had a peace in my soul that was just past everything. And he started laughing. Of course, it was a good laugh because it meant, as he pointed out, that I had truly been saved. That when we're saved, when we're born again, truly born again, the Spirit of God comes into our lives and sets up residence there. And you can actually feel that there's somebody else in there. And I experienced it firsthand. I was so thankful. Steve advised me, he said, I'd give up worrying about seeing that psychologist. I took his advice on that and decided to just start going to church and learning a little bit about the Christian life from him. And so within a very short time after going to church there regularly and all, there was a young lady in the choir that I met who turned out a few months later to become my wife. And it was so obvious to us both that we were both meant for one another. And it was an amazing story later on as we look back on it. We got married in October of 1985, and things seemed to be going so well. I was actually called to the ministry. I started preparing myself for ministry and going to school. And as I went to school, I was blessed to be able to have a pastorate, a first pastorate, then a second pastorate. And in 1991, I was at the second pastorate. And I remember sitting there in my chair and just thanking God, thinking, Lord, I'm completely free of this depression, the guilt, the anguish. I had never felt better in my life. I was completely free. I was so happy. And I should have been happy. And as I continued on there in that church, a little bit later on, within a year, we moved to Texas where I went to seminary at Fort Worth. And it was the best years of my life. But you know something? I wasn't aware it was coming. But in 1995, this whole thing returned to me again. And I will talk about that in the next video. I was thinking to God, what's going on? I thought this was the answer to all of that. But it came back. And I'll explain to you what happened with that and how it came back and with the ferocity it came back. And when finishing up seminary and coming to our first pastorate out of seminary in North Carolina, I will talk about all that I had to go through with that particular episode. But I want to tell you this. If you're struggling with depression or any kind of mental illness and you're at your wit's end, you're going to see counselors and it doesn't seem they're giving you medication, that doesn't seem to help or anything. I can tell you firsthand, I was not looking for God. I was having too much fun on my own until all this started with me. But in the end, I reached out because I needed mercy. But I found out that when I reached out, God was there for me to take His hand. And I was saved. Yes, I would have another episode of depression, maybe even worse than the first two. But the one thing I knew for sure, and I was saved, and if anything ever happened to me, I was going to heaven when I die. And there was God who was always there to help me with my condition. So I just want to urge you, if you haven't tried God, if you sincerely want to try God, let me tell you, He will step up. He will come to you. If you're genuine, I promise you, on the authority of God's Word, He will step up and help you right where you are. It might not take your depression completely away, because that's a physical ailment. It has to do with its biological imbalance. But at the same time, God will be there for you, my friend, and it will make a big difference with you. I hate to think about people who are going through depression. Many people, so many today, taking their lives. And you go out into eternity. Into eternity without God. You have no hope at all. Nothing to look forward to. But let me tell you, God will respond to you. He loves you. He cares for you. He showed that to me. And I was the least lovable kind of person. But He showed me that He loved me. Made me one of His own. And then has helped me with this problem, even as it would return in 1995. And so I want to ask you, if you will, if you're interested in these videos, if some of this registers with you, subscribe to this channel, because I'm coming at this from a very straightforward angle. I'm not holding anything back. I'm talking about the real here, the real problem, and how it affects you. And if I can be of any help to you, if any of this strikes a chord with you, then let me ask you, if you're interested, just subscribe to the channel. I'll be making more and more videos like this and beyond. The title of my channel is Finding Hope in Mental Illness. And I want to ask you to come back again and see what there is. You don't have to be a Christian to look at these videos, but I just share that as something that happened with me that might interest you at some point. But thank you so much for coming by, and may God bless you.